Good evening and welcome to the 23rd annual MahtoREADi One Book, One Community event. Thanks so much for coming. We're excited to have this many people here. My name is Connie Kornstrom. I'm a member of the organizing committee for MahtoREADi. I'm one of like 10 people, not that significant. Everyone has a role, but we're really excited to have you here. The One Book, One Community concept came in 1998 in the Seattle Public Library system. They had this idea of bringing people together through reading one book and having kind of a community through that one book. The idea went through the United States, and many communities adopted that same concept, including the area of Mahtomedi and White Bear Lake. In 2003, MahtoREADi was created with the vision to ignite and engage people in our community in one book. But we had a twist. We wanted to have only books written by Minnesota authors. So that's what we've been doing for 23 years, to have Minnesota authors. Luckily, in Minnesota, we have a ton of amazing award-winning authors that have agreed to be our featured authors, much like our featured author tonight, Leif Enger. Before I start the full program, I need to make some important acknowledgments. The first is the support that we received, the funding that we received from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Group that is typically called the Legacy Funds. They are distributed through MELSA to Washington County Library, and it's an alliance of the metro area libraries. So we're very grateful for those funds. The second acknowledgement is the school district's land acknowledgement statement. So I'm going to read it. Mahtomedi Public Schools acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of indigenous peoples, predominantly the Dakota and Ojibwe, past and present. Mahtomedi comes from the Dakota word for bear, Mahto. We honor and respect the history of this land that was taken and that we currently reside on. And we continuously seek opportunities to recognize the hardships the indigenous people who lived on the land endured. Mahtomedi Public Schools is committed to educating ourselves and the community about Native American peoples and these lands, and continuing to strengthen our relationships with all indigenous communities. Thank you. Yeah. So on with the program. This year's MahtoREADi featured book is I Cheerfully Refuse, written by the esteemed Leif Enger. Leif is a bona fide Minnesotan. He grew up in Osakis, Minnesota, and he was a reporter for the Minnesota Public Radio, NPR. He now lives in Duluth with his wife, Robin. While still working as a reporter, he wrote his debut and brilliant novel, Peace Like a River. It was published in 2001. I'm sure all of you, if not all of you, have read it. Peace Like a River won the Book Sense Award for Fiction and was named one of the year's best books by Time Magazine and Los Angeles Times. He followed up with a second novel, So Brave, Young and Handsome, and that was a Midwest Booksellers Honor Book and won the High Plains Book Award for Fiction. His third novel, Virgil Wander, was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and was named a Best Book of the Year by Amazon, Library Journal, Bookpage, and the Chicago Public Library. Leif's most recent novel, and the one he'll be discussing this evening, again, I Cheerfully Refuse, was published in 2024. It has received a wide critical acclaim, including the 2024 Editor's Choice Prize for Fiction by Indie's Book of the Year Awards, a 2025-26 National Endowment for Arts Big Read title, and longlisted for the 2025 Joyce Carol Oates Prize for Fiction. So as you can see, Leif is kind of a big deal. And we're so lucky that he's here tonight. But you know what? He doesn't act like a big deal at all. He's just genuine. So I Cheerfully Refuse is set in a not too distant America. It's the story of Rainey, a bereaved and pursued musician embarking under sail on a sentient Lake Superior in search of his departed, deeply beloved, book-selling wife, Lark. Amid the challenges of life on the sea, Rainey is buoyed by the physical beauty, surprising humor, generous strangers, and an unexpected companion in a young girl who comes aboard. Rainey's private quest for the love of his life grows into something wider and wilder, sweeping up friends and foes alike in his strengthening wake. We are truly honored to have the author Leif Enger with us tonight. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Leif.
Hey. I'll get this squared away in just a moment. There. Okay. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks, Connie, for that great introduction. Thanks, Lisa, for, the backstage cheese. I would just say, if you're going to skip a meal and drive somewhere, you want some of those little Baby Bell cheese rounds. It's a privilege to be here, and it's a real delight. And by the way, this program, MahtoREADi, has really built a track record. I was cruising through the list of authors who have been here before. Great company to be in. Terrific lineup. Peter Guy, Marcy Rendon, who I finally met last week up in Grand Marais, and Kruger and Eskins, and Gary Paulson, and Sarah Stonich, and so many others, Kate DiCamillo. I'm very honored to be part of it, so thank you for the invitation. Here's my favorite thing about it, my favorite thing about any event that is built around stories or music or art or craft of any kind. We are living now through a complicated moment. There's so much kind of rage and rhetoric and punditry and certitude that it feels like the cultural bloodstream is moving through hardened arteries, and everybody's kind of waiting for the stroke. It's like, when's the big one gonna take us out? And maybe that can be prevented. Maybe we can get this old body out for some long walks and eat a few more salads, do some deep breathing, find our equilibrium. There's a great Tom Petty lyric that I remember every day that says, "Most things I worry about never happen anyway." But we live in uncertain times. Important to recognize that. A while ago, I heard an Irish storyteller I like say that the best response to uncertain times is the making of art, which I love, whether it's telling stories or building boats or painting pictures, or making movies or playing music, whatever it is. Baking bread. It's hard to be in despair with your elbows up to here in sourdough. And getting together like this, around a story is, to me, as a storyteller myself, that is straight medicine. So not just escapism, although I think stories can be escapism, and there's a case to be made for that. But I don't feel like this business is just about looking away. Gathering around something creative and joyful like a story or a song seems to me like a direct response to uncertainty. You can't solve uncertainty. You can't issue it a mandate. You can't tell it to go away. What this sort of thing does is it just says, hey, life is mysterious. It's a mystery. Why don't you come in and take off your coat? I've built a fire. Let me pour you a drink. Let's tell some stories. I've been on the road quite a bit lately, meeting people who read like there's simply no tomorrow. And I think that might be the best way to ensure that there is a tomorrow. Charles Bukowski said that Ernest Hemingway wrote like a man who didn't have time to lie. Such a great way to say it. But now I keep running into readers who have some of that. Guy in a bookstore told me, I got no time now for anything but beauty, which I thought was a really interesting thing to say. He had a stack of books in his arms. He was heading for the checkout. He had, I think, Mary Oliver in there. He had Jim Harrison. He had Patti Smith, a memoir by Patti Smith. He had, I think, a collection of poetry by Seamus Heaney. But he was quoting John Keats, who said, "Truth is beauty, beauty truth. That is all we know on earth and all we need to know." I think I said that wrong, but you get the idea. And what happens when you encounter readers like that, I don't know about you, for me, it feels like the sky gets brighter, like the sky brightens, and my lungs get bigger. It gives me hope. And I also start to realize how many of us are already friends. We didn't even know it. We're already friends. So the story I'm here to talk about tonight is this one, I Cheerfully Refuse. It is not quite brand new. It came out last year. But it's dystopian, so it feels super current. In the story, books themselves are suspect. They have become controversial because their pages are full of ideas. They're full of characters who might be subversive, who might not comply. And ignorance has become a kind of safety in that world of the near future. Books are dangerous, which they've always been. They always will be. If books are dangerous, they're doing their job. This is what they're here for. And people who own them, people who read them, people who, God forbid, sell them, they are troublemakers in this near future. There are other clues in the story that things have gone awry. For example, 16 people own everything. The slang term for them in the book is astronauts. There's really no safety net for anybody else. No one can afford to go to the doctor. If you're looking for bright spots, there are a few. The prison industry is huge. A lot of profitable prisons. And Big Pharma is thriving. They've really dialed in the compliance medications. I have had some people ask me, why write this kind of story? Do we really need another dystopian novel? Short answer is, yeah, I think we do. I think we do. But the longer and better answer is that I really, it sounds like a dodge, but I don't pick the story. The story really does pick me, and I know that sounds like a cop-out. It's a cliche because it's true. Usually the way it works for me and for a lot of writers I know is I have 2 or 3 ideas percolating at all times. Things that are moving around in the back of my imagination. Stories I think would be fun to write. It has to be fun or I'm just not going to do it. Stories I think I can sustain over the length of a novel. And then what happens is, at some point, a character will step out of the dark of one of those potential stories and start badgering me and just get into my imagination in a big way. And then when that happens, that is the book I write. Because I figure that's as close as I get to the muse landing on my shoulder. And the only advice I would give a writer or an artist of any kind is when the muse lands, don't ignore him. Don't ignore her. Don't ignore the muse. Without the muse, you're just not going to get anything done. And then also there's this about the choice of book. Most of the stories that get into your head and stay there, the really great novels, the Dickensian books, the great mythologies, they don't take place during times of overwhelming peace and prosperity. The great stories happen, I think, in times of war and the aftermath of war, in times of economic ruin, religious confusion, social engineering run amok. Dickens didn't write, "It was the best of times," and then stop. So I thought about this book for a couple of years, leading up to 2020. And then this character showed up in my head and sort of wanted to talk, wanted to have a conversation, tell me his story. Right away, he said his name. It was Rainy. I loved that. There's a lot to be said for names that are weather patterns, I think. He was a bass player working in bar bands in Duluth, and he was a house painter. And I liked his voice. I liked his voice. He was upbeat the way a lot of musicians are upbeat. He was talkative. He was kind of wide-eyed. He had some naivete. Naivete is really available to me as the youngest of 4 kids in a Midwestern household. It's kind of my native tongue. And then he was also in love. Rainey was in love. And that's always a good thing in a story. That really is what settled it. Because I think that in even really awful times, in terrible times, dystopian times, people still fall in love. What drives Odysseus on his journey home from the war is getting back to Penelope. The thing that makes Orpheus, sling his guitar on his back and travel to the underworld is the idea that he might run into Eurydice down there, the love of his life that he has lost. And he might be able to go to the underworld and bring her back to the land of warmth and music and light. So I had this notion of a character who just refuses despair. And full disclosure, I started the book the day we all went into lockdown. So second half of March 2020. So despair it was available, wasn't it? It was there. And I just wanted to be able to shrug it off, to refuse it. And then here came this talkative house painter and this lover of life and of one particular woman. So that is why this story, because I just really couldn't say no. And so I'm going to read you the first scene that I wrote. It's not the first scene in the book, but I wanted to write the scene where he encounters the woman that he will marry and who turns out to be the presiding spirit of the book. When I met Lark, there were 2 things I had to do, 2 ideas to embrace or lose my chance. Reading was the first. I could read, but rarely did. My parents, ahead of their time, had little use for books, so I grew up a knockabout. It's fair to say, in my case, size preceded sense. I wasn't a bully. Well, maybe sometimes. I'm not without regrets. Call me a genial fighter, a boy of 6 words, a lummox grinning over pancakes. Adults mentioned my appetite and big hands, my aptitude for labor. In a grade school Robin Hood play, I was Little John, and what a good role. I took to it naturally, and suppose I never really stopped. By age 28, I was working as a house painter and sitting in with 2 or 3 tavern bands in Duluth. At noon one winter day, I left my job detailing a stucco high-ender with hardwood moldings and a crenellated roof like a battlement. Embarrassed to eat near the meticulous homeowners, I strolled a few blocks to the library for a covert lunch in a study carrel. The carrel was around the corner from the help desk where a woman with a quiet, radiant voice explained technology to ancients. There didn't seem to be any non-ancients in the library that day, only her at the desk and me, who just wanted a warm place to eat a cheese sandwich. Crane as I might, I couldn't catch sight of her, which only made her voice more arresting. The library had recently scaled back its services, and there was a long shuffling queue waiting for assistance. What happened to their online therapeutics? Why had their credits been refused? Their inquiries were nervous, angry, imperious, frightened. Her voice in reply was low and melodious. It settled them, reminded them they were in the right place. I hadn't felt anxious at all sitting at my carrel, yet I too felt soothed by her delivery and shut my eyes to listen. Almost right away, it became impossible not to imagine hearing that voice, morning and night, a voice that was the opposite of panic. On my way out, I tried again to glimpse its owner, but she was obscured behind a mammoth gesturing clergyman filing a subversive materials complaint. The same carol next day, another cheese sandwich. I went back hoping to hear again that easy, low music, and sure enough, there it was, addressing the agitation and pain of the fearful. This time I sensed a trace of humor or affection down inside her voice. Again, I was stirred by a nameless melancholy, by envy for those who lived within that frequency. I didn't think of it in those words. Picture a voice like a river's edge, where the water turns back on itself, orbits quietly, proceeds downstream in laughter. This time when I left, she had gone on break. Again, I was denied the sight of she who had beguiled me. In later visits, I paid attention not just to tone, but to content. Pulling books as camouflage, I took a carol nearer her desk, though still out of view. She did far more than direct people to charts and information. She had a way of answering unasked questions, finessing and adjusting her recommendations. History for the ambitious, novels for the lonely, poetry for the heartbroken, all of it a lettered world alien to me. I began to take notes. Dickens, she replied in a near whisper to one request, and Dickens, I wrote in stub pencil. Why, you ask? How would I know? When a flame is lit, move toward it. Titles, authors, barely floated notions, whatever she said, that's what I scribbled. I didn't yet know the word oracle, but she had that smoky appeal. There seemed no person she couldn't understand, no question too dead to resurrect. She told a bored girl about a 16th century poet whose goal was to read everything ever written. Think about that. The girl did not believe her, but I did. Apparently this poet went blind in the attempt. Luminous is another word I did not know. This scene was incredibly fun to write, not only because it posed the challenge of writing about a man falling in love with a woman before he had ever seen her face, which had a special luminosity and joy for me, falling in love with her because of the kindness in her voice and the whimsy and the affection inside of her voice. Also, it was a chance to write about a guy falling in love with two things at once. He falls in love first with Lark, the librarian, and then, because he is simply, he's in need of something that he can approach her with, he knows that he's not going to be that interesting to her unless he has something to say. And so he starts to take the notes and check out the books that he hears her recommend to other people, and he checks them out and he reads them. And he does this until he works up the nerve to approach her. So he's falling in love with two things at once. He falls in love with Lark, and he falls in love with the written word. Falls in love with literature, falls in love with stories, begins to neglect his work. He can't work well while he's reading, so he just works badly. And it was so much fun. Here's another little hint if you want to write something. Write about somebody who is so interested in something that you get more interested in it yourself. Stevenson said the world is so full of a number of things. I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. There's a lot to that. The world opens to him twice at the same time. Can a person be that lucky? I think they can. I also found writing this that even though his world was kind of badly screwed up, that I enjoyed being in it. I liked being in it. even though there was a sense of constant threat, even though it was easy for anybody in his world to lose everything overnight as he learns, it was also a real relief for me to spend time there with its crazy storms and its casual violence and its loss of foundational civilization, which seems kind of crazy. But as I was thinking about this, and the fact that I was getting more joy out of this process than I ever had from a book before, I think it had to do with this. A lot of the artifice in our current world is stripped away by the time Rainey tells his story. So right now we live in a time when you can basically buy a cheap counterfeit of anything you want. You can go to your laptop and say, make me a movie in which I'm the king of the world and I run everything. And it will do so. It will do so in 5 seconds. It'll give you that movie. I read a story in the Times a week or two ago about some people who had fallen in love with their ChatGPT companions. I don't know what to say about that. I have no idea what to say about that. But in Rainey's world, people, out of necessity, live on the surface of the earth. They live close to the ground. They depend on the sky and the weather and the corn and beans and the animals the way our ancestors did not that many generations ago. And I found that wildly comforting and like a major silver lining to all the terrible stuff that was happening. And then later in the book, and I won't give something away here in case you haven't read it, but Rainey finds himself responsible for the care of a 9-year-old girl who joins him on his travels. And Sol, her name is Sol, she's 9, she's smart, she is completely uneducated. And so Rainey very gently attempts to introduce her to the thing that changed his life so completely years before. So I'm going to do another short reading in which he introduces her to the alphabet. I said, Sol, do you know the letters? She shook her head no. It was a clear night, and dew had begun to form on the decking. I reached out and wrote with a fingertip in the moisture, tracing out the letters S-O-L. See, that's your name, I said. She frowned and squirmed and said to do it again. I wrote her name again below the first, with more intention, even a little elegance, and dew gathered at the edges of the letters. She looked at me as though I had performed something either godlike or unspeakably wicked. Okay, listen, hang on, I said, and I went below and found an old tool apron that was still rolled up in a storage nook above the folding table. Inside the apron's pocket was a carpenter's pencil, the kind you sharpen with a knife. I grabbed it, and also the Field Guide to Animal Tracks by Olaus Muri, and returned to the cockpit. Look here, I said, flipping to the back of the field guide where there were a few blank pages. I rubbed the tip of the carpenter's pencil with my fingertips so a little graphite came off, and then flattened the open book against my knee and wrote Sol at the top of a page. C, S like a winding stream, O like somebody's head, L is just a straight line north to south. There it is, Sol. What a good name you have. Now you try. I held out the pencil, but she shrank away as if I had offered her a snake. She said, you do it some more. So I wrote a few words deliberately, boat, bird, rainy, and so on, saying the letters aloud as they appeared. Still, she wouldn't take the pencil. At one point, she touched it only to yank her hand away. It was plain she felt some shifty wizardry was at work. Her face turned small and distant, and she said, it isn't for me. Well, I wasn't going to be weird about it. I just thought she would be interested, someone who sparked and flared the way she did. It's okay, I closed the book. It had a faded paper jacket with a deer looking over its shoulder at the reader. Something about the deer caught me. Maybe its curious expression. I said, this was written by a man named Olaus, see? I pointed out the author's name. Before it could be a book, Olaus had to write down all these words. Probably used a pencil, like this one. Wrote one word at a time about the tracks of raccoons and bears and wolves and big cats. He even wrote about the tracks a maple leaf makes when it blows across the fresh snow. And now this book, I tapped its cover, is Olaus's track. Because of it, we know this guy Olaus was here before us. And he loved animals and knew all about them. And maple leaves, she said. Right. She was quiet. Words are one way we leave tracks in the world, Soul. Maybe one day you will write a book like Olaus did, and people will read it like I've been reading to you, and they will know you were here and a little bit about what you were like. Soul's face remained far away. Her cheeks were white and hollow, but her eyes shone a bit, I was fairly sure. So this is The Field Guide to Animal Tracks by Olaus Muri. And this is going to seem like a detour, but I promise it isn't. When I was 12, my brother Lee gave me this book. And it's just what it looks like. It's a small format hardcover. It's got illustrations on pretty much every page, pictures of the animals that he has drawn, pictures of their tracks. And I remember he gave me this book, and it seemed like something magical. You remember field guides? Remember these? The whole idea is that if you're out walking in the field or in the woods or beside the lake, wherever, and you run across a track and you don't know what made it, you can look in your field guide, which is small enough to fit in the pocket of your coat. And you can pull it out and you can page through until you find out, oh, this was a mink that went past my house. This was a muskrat on the shore of the lake. This was a skunk, or it was a dog or a fox or a coyote. They're kind of brilliant. I'm sure that there's an app now that will do the same thing. I prefer the field guide because it was written by Olaus Muri. And Muri, probably a name that not many of you know. He's sort of a lost figure. But at the time, in the early part of the 20th century, he was a major deal. He was a naturalist, and as an influence on environmental policy, he was up there with Gifford Pinchot, Aldo Leopold, names you might know better. Olaus was right up there with those guys, and he was very influential at the time. And anyway, he wrote and illustrated this field guide so that you can say, a mink went past my house last night. Here's what it made me realize when I was 12. And the reason I still have this book, and it has lived through every move that Robin and I have made through the years. It made me realize that even though some tracks are exciting and some are a little, some of them are your neighbor's cat. But all of them are an invitation. A track is an invitation. If you're out walking and you see a track, it's an invitation to a story. Most of us turn down the invitation most of the time. Me too. Because we've got somewhere to be, we've got to go to work, we've got to get to class, we have to get home in time to get supper started, whatever it is. But you can also accept the invitation if you've got time, and sometimes you do. Sometimes you have time to say, I'm curious about this. If this is a mink track, maybe I will follow it and see where the mink has gone. This is a very exciting decision to make. Not because you're going to see the mink, you're not going to see the mink. Wild animals don't want to be seen, and most of the time they're really good at not being seen. Also, by the time you see the track, it's probably several hours old. The animal is way out in front of you. You're not going to see it. But here's what you will see. You will see the same landscape that creature saw. You'll understand maybe what drew him in this direction or that. You can get down on your knees, or if you want to, and get really close to his point of view. You can start to imagine the daily life and routine of a fellow citizen that isn't yourself. And it's more fun than you might imagine. Years ago, I read a quote from E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web, and he said, "Whenever I get tired of myself and tired of the way I view the world, I try to imagine the world the way it looks to a spider in the corner of my office." And of course, he wrote Charlotte's Web because he had the capability of just putting himself in the mind of some other creature. Kind of a beautiful thing to be able to do. Now, Robin and I live in Duluth, near the university, residential street. And Duluth is, there's a lot of animals in Duluth. We get bears in the alley. We get more deer in Duluth than we used to get on the farm. There are always tracks of the neighbors' cats. And there are a lot of ravens, including one with a voice that sounds just like an old writer I used to know and admire. But years ago, we lived on a farm 90 miles west of Duluth. And one day there was a set of tracks in the woods behind the house that I could not identify. They looked a little like dog tracks, but also a little like the cat tracks, a really large cat. I couldn't identify them. They looked like they might indicate slightly webbed feet, but I couldn't really tell. So I went back to the house and I got the field guide. And I identified that they were the tracks of a river otter. An otter was going through the woods between one lake and another lake that we sort of lived in between. Little Pete Lake and Cedar Lake in Aiken County. What do we know about otters? If you are a biologist like Olaus Muri, you know that they range over much of North America. You know that they belong to the Mustelidae family, along with weasels and mink and the fabled wolverine. But I am not a biologist. I'm a guy who reads entirely for pleasure. So for me, what I know about otters comes almost 100% from the wind in the willows. Do you remember Otter in that story? Otter, he's a side character, right? Otter is, he's always sort of showing up out of the water and making some jokes, and then he's gone before you know it. And in a way, he's the best character because he's not, solid and immovable like the badger. He's not hapless like Mole. And he's not as ridiculous as Toad. And he's probably also not quite as great a friend as Ratty, right? The water rat. But if you're looking for someone who's just going to be fun to be around, who do you want to bump into? You want to bump into the otter, right? Otter is your guy. Otter's the one who shows up and he's got a great story to tell, or he's got an adventure that he wants to take you on. He's going to make you laugh and then he's going to vanish, leaving you wanting more. Otter is 40 to 45% more fun than any of us. Otter's your guy. So here is what is cool about an excellent field guide. So Olaus Muri gives us these drawings of otters' paw marks, which, I'm not going to show them because this is very small. You won't see them from here. But then he also writes down this very tactile memory of these otters that he saw while he was out in the field looking for whatever he could find. So Olaus writes this. First, he shows you the tracks. He says, "One wintry day in southern Hudson Bay, I was snowshoeing up a small stream when I spot a movement on the snowy stream bank up ahead. I realized it was an otter, and the next moment it slid down the bank. Another one appeared, clambered up the bank, and slid down. A third appeared from a hole in the ice, and for several minutes I watched these frolicsome animals climbing, sliding, climbing, sliding over and over again until they all disappeared under the ice. Their playtime was over, and they went on their way beneath the ice as they so often do." Well, I got to say that to judge from the tracks, because these were interesting tracks, they climbed little hills, and then the paws would pull in, and it would just become like a toboggan track as they slid down. I had never seen anything like it. I would not have guessed what that was except for Olaus Miri. Olaus told me what that was, and Kenneth Graham, who wrote The Wind in the Willows, got the personality exactly right. Because these tracks went all over the place. If you drew a straight line between where I picked them up and the lake where they ended up, it would be half a mile. But I bet I went 3.5 or 4 miles following those tracks just all over the place, because I wanted to see what he thought of the world. I wanted to see that. And that's a cool thing, and it's always available. All you have to do is look down and find some tracks and follow them. Eventually, that otter made his way down to Cedar Lake, and he vanished down a hole in the ice, just like in the field guide. I'm sure if you looked at a map, it was half a mile. I'm sure if you followed the tracks the way I did, 3.5 or 4 miles. It was an interesting day, and I was exhausted when I got home, and I was laughing for happiness. A great day, even though I never saw the animal. Just picturing what he did. Mary Oliver, the terrific poet, used to write about paying the attention that becomes devotion. And to some tiny little degree, I get what she means. I don't think she was talking about being, a scholar or a fanatic or obsessive or monastic. And that's fine if you have that personality. That's great. Maybe you're already Thomas Merton, I don't know, or the dude, kind of abiding, But I think for most of us, we normal people, she just means noticing things. She's talking about noticing. Letting yourself once in a while give your day over to the natural curiosity that you already carry around. And this actually does connect. It connects to my book, and also to every other book that you've had in this long and beautiful series. Because I think that in some ways, books are like our paw prints that we leave behind us. There are prints for good and sometimes for bad. Every time you have your neighbors over for a bonfire or a bowl of soup, you leave a track. That's how I've started to think about it because of Olaus. Every time you have dessert with a friend, or a bowl of soup, every time you sit down with your guitar and your wobbly voice, and maybe also every time you humiliate somebody, you leave a track, you leave a mark. And this is a good thing to remember. We all need to remember it. Every time you get a chance to be cruel or to support cruelty, but you cheerfully refuse, you leave a track then too. And when you pick up a story to read, brand new stories or old stories, Beowulf or Gilgamesh, you're following a trail left by somebody else. You're experiencing this world from a different point of view. You're investing in understanding. Even if it feels like you're just being entertained, you're investing in understanding the world from a wider viewpoint. You're building empathy, which, if it needs to be said, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Stories broaden your world. They surprise you with the intelligence that arrives in the night and often saves the day. And they do all this because their business is beauty, which is the same thing as truth, like Keats said. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Just to hear a man say a bunch of things you already knew. It was good of you. I heard a guy give this sort of benediction, and I'm just going to change it a little bit for my purposes, but I like to say it. May your tongue be graceful and your arm be strong. May music find its home inside your chest. May you sail north, and may stories land like snowflakes on your decks. Thanks. I will open this up, and I think we have some time.
Thank you very much. We're going to open up for questions, and we have 2 microphones in the room. Dan and Amanda are going to be circulating, but I'll start with a question I have. You actually answered my question that I wrote, but I have a follow-up.
Okay.
I have a follow-up. All the books that Rainey read based on Lark's notes and comments, where did you get that list? Was that list important, the books that he was reading?
Are you talking about the books that Rainey has on the boat?
No, the ones that at the very first scene when he's starting to listen to the books that Lark is recommending, and he starts reading those books. Where did you get that? I mean, why those books?
Oh, I just found them terribly compelling. Those are stories that I loved and read and reread, and you know, you develop a soft spot for certain kinds of narratives, and I think Rainey fell hard into the big stories, the mythologies. Very familiar stories that we all know, sort of our cultural heritage is these stories, and I think Rainey just found them irresistible. Like, he couldn't look away. There's a certain kind of story. I remember reading The Wind in the Willows when I was a kid, and it was recommended to me by my 3rd grade teacher, Lorraine Johnson, and wow, I guess I was 8 years old. And I thought, well, The Wind in the Willows, that sounds, I don't know, that sounds it sounds a little soft. I mean, it sounded like maybe it was a girl's story. And I was 8, and I wanted to be, you know, tough, and never got good at that. But I remember my teacher said, no, it was when we were all ordering those Scholastic books, you know, you'd make your order, and then they'd come, you know, 3 or 4 weeks later, and you'd take them home. And Mrs. Johnson said, you're going to love The Wind in the Willows. I thought, well, if you say so. So I did order it, and then I remember taking it to my room where I had been sent, and climbing to the upper bunk, which was my brother's, and starting to read it, and I just fell in. I don't know what to say about it, except that, you know, there's that early scene where Mole is doing his house cleaning, and he's down under the ground, and then something calls to him from above, and I just fell into it, and he burrows his way out, and he runs to the river. He smells the water. He meets the water rat, which is, you know, down there just waiting to take him on an adventure, and off they go, and he never looks back, and his life is never the same. And it was life-changing for me to read that story, and since then there have been so many others. So I often feel like books have been this just straight shot of adrenaline into my veins. I think I just wanted to infuse Rainey as the narrator with that kind of adoration of pure story. Yeah, thanks.
I'll leave it to you guys. Does anybody want to have a question? Step up, or go to Dan, and I'll leave you to it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm just curious to hear a little bit about your writing process, and I'm specifically curious if when you start out, do you have kind of a full outline in mind for a story, or does it come to you as you go? I'd just love to hear more about that. Thanks.
I always have a full outline, and it doesn't last 10 pages. I write the outline because I feel like I need to have something out there, but it's really kind of a crutch that I throw away almost instantly. I would love to be able to stick to one, but the story usually goes in some direction I didn't see coming, and that's partly what takes me so long, because stories are they're kind of slippery for me. I'd love to be able to just say, well, here's my story. I'm gonna follow this outline, and boom, boom, boom. write a book a year like a lot of terrific writers do, and I can't seem to do that and still care about the story. They get away. They're very slippery indeed, and I have to chase them all over the countryside. But I do also find that it's helpful to write every day, not just on the book itself, but I have a practice of writing morning pages. I don't know if you've encountered that idea. Julia Cameron wrote a terrific book called The Artist's Way many years ago. And she writes specifically about getting up and spending 30 minutes, not 29, not 31, 30 minutes just writing as fast as you can about whatever comes into your mind. And the way that sort of flushes out the system a little bit. It's like taking a big drink of water. You just feel refreshed, and it sets your mind going in directions you did not expect. So I've found that to be really helpful. I've done that for about the last 20 years. That's been helpful. That's my main discipline. I always do write outlines, and I always discard them. Yeah.
Did you make up stories for your kids when they were young?
Yeah, I did. For a while, every night, until they sort of stopped being interested. But for a while, yeah, I would sometimes, because it was so much work to make up new ones with new casts of characters, I would just do like a serial. And I usually would start out by saying, once there was a guy with a skinny body but a big square head. Because I wanted to make them laugh to start with. And then I would spin out the adventure. And it would take a week or two. And that was fun. I enjoyed it. But I never thought about it beforehand, and it was just a matter of spinning it out. And then what happened, of course, is they started to tell me where the story should go. So they began to take hand in the mystery that was developing. And I would try to work within those parameters. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, storytelling was fun when they were small. Yeah.
I just had a question about where Icebridge is. And there's places in the book that are real places, and there are places that aren't real places, at least not yet. And I was wondering if those places were places that sort of became, or if they're modeled after places that are real, mostly because we want to be able to sort of like trace the route that Rainey takes from Icebridge, and we can't start without knowing where Icebridge is. I guess, okay, I'm going to append it and ask one more thing. Why did Icebridge end up being the kind of community it was, and then other communities ended up like having so much sort of like more negativity and debauchery and sort of falling prey to so much more
Well, you know, that's such a good question, and thank you for asking it. In the first, there are a couple ways to talk about that. One is that I did not want to write, I didn't want to name any towns for real towns where genuinely dreadful things were happening, because I did not want to seem predictive, and I didn't want to disrespect the people who are living in towns where actually things are probably good. This was about a dysfunctional future, and so I wasn't going to single any place out and say, look out for these dirtbags in this town. I didn't want to do that. That seemed unwise. But there are places that are real. You know, Duluth obviously is a real town and has a role to play in the story. There are others too. But you'll notice that in those stories, there's like kind of there's a shortage of meanness and dirtbags. Those tend to exist in the places I gave names to of my own devising. Icebridge just struck me as a good name for a totally fictional town up the North Shore, not too far from, let's say, Beaver Bay, in that neck of the woods. I love that part of the shore. I adore that part of the shore. Robin and I spend a lot of time up there. We live in Duluth, and we go up on the regular and visit our favorite spots. But I thought, in the future that sort of is shown in this story, a lot of communities have had to become quite self-sufficient. There's not a lot of support for towns at the end of the trail. And I think that seems not unlikely. This isn't like my set of predictions. It was just, I cast my mind forward, and some of the trends that have been current for the last decade or so have made me think this is the way it could go. And so given that, I thought that there were towns where genuinely wicked things would happen. I thought that there might be real rivalries between communities, like on either side of a waterway, sharing only a bridge between them. I saw that there was possible conflicts happening between communities, but then also places where the right spirit seems to preside, such as Jolie. There are places. I wanted the book to be balanced, and so after Rainey goes out on his the adventure he never wanted to have, and he's sailing north. And all kinds of terrible things have befallen him. He potters into Jolie, and his mast is leaning and his boat's in terrible shape. And that happens to be, and this is one of those things I couldn't plan, but he happens to land in a town where there's a lot of goodness, and people take care of each other. I mean, not entirely. I mean, there are terrible things there too. But it's, I think maybe I needed some hope at that juncture in the story, and Jolie just provided it, just came out with its hands full and offered them to me as the storyteller, and I just gratefully accepted. I didn't ever want to leave Jolie. It was tough to send him back out on the water after that. I absolutely forget where your question was taking me, but thank you for asking that. Yeah. Yes.
I read your books out of order. I actually started with Cheerfully Refuse. And I noticed a common theme, though, as I was going through the rest, that about 2/3 of the way through your books, I have it completely figured out how they're going to end. And I'm always way off the mark.
Well, that's a relief.
So this is not going to be a spoiler for Cheerfully Refuse, because I already admitted that I was way wrong. But hear me out. And I want to know if this was one of your choose-your-own-adventure types of outline for when you were writing the story. All right, so the rich are called astronauts. They're called astronauts because they're often private, secluded, building getaway vehicles, spaceships, right? This is in the future, so, right, it could happen. And the Tashi, is it Tashi comet?
Yeah.
Yes, the Tashi comet, unbeknownst to the general masses, is actually on a direct path to impact Earth and cause mass extinction. And the whole reason why they're mass producing Willow is because after the astronauts make their escape right before the Tashi comet impacts, they're going to mass disperse Willow so that the people who are poor enough to be left behind can end it on their own terms. So this is exactly how I thought this book was going to end. And this is not anywhere near where it takes you. And I've noticed that a lot of your books that I think are going to end in some type of finality, there's a common thread where it ends in a continuation instead.
Yeah.
It's never just the story being snuffed out. There's always some type of, continuance and, and then many years later this happened or whatnot. And I need to know how you decide to stop writing the story. How do you end it? How do you decide how to finish it?
That's a really remarkable comment. That would have been good too. But that's way, way darker than I went. I saw the Tashi Comet as like a beacon of, look, people have this long history of, it's like, oh, there's a comet. It's the end of everything, it's the end. God is going to wipe us all out, and here comes the missile. And I really regret that. I really wish that people would look at, and I think most do, would look at things in space and say, oh my goodness, look at that. That's beautiful. It should make you dream, right? It should make you dream. Not necessarily of going to Mars. I mean, how about if we take care of it here? You right? I think the astronauts probably would love to go to, to get out and leave us all behind. I kind of hope they do, man. I kind of hope the billionaires all get together and get on one of Elon's rockets and head out. Just do it. The rest of us will happily stay. But man, I totally forgot what your actual question was. I got so involved. Yeah.
How do you decide to put the pen down? When do you know how you want to leave the story and let it lie? Close that back cover.
Right. Such a good question. Where do you know it ends? I've occasionally had trouble knowing exactly where to end a story. I would say with this one, with Cheerfully, it was very easy because even though I really had to rework the ending in the writing process because my first one wasn't satisfying, but the second one really was because I wanted to be able to leave the reader with a sense of continuation. I don't want a Hollywood ending. I don't want a cataclysm. I don't want everybody living underground. Not interesting. Much more interesting to realize, no, the world's going to go on for a long time. No matter if we mess it up, no matter if we poison the water, no matter if we have nuclear, whatever it is, the world's going to go on for a long time, and we're going to have to deal with it for a long time. So what I wanted was to do that in a way that seemed realistic to me, and also that seemed reasonably hopeful to me. The things that are a problem in Rainey's time aren't going to be a problem forever. They're dealing with astronauts. They're dealing with an oligarchy. They're dealing with corrupt people in power. We know a little something about that, and I don't think it's going to last forever in that story. I think that things are going to happen for the good. I'm for the future. I'm for the future being bright. I want us to do everything we can to make it bright, and I want it to be long. So let's let it be long.
Thank you so much for being here. What does the title mean for you?
I cheerfully refuse. It's a couple of different things. One is that I like the idea of a novel being set up as a refusal of the things that the writer doesn't like. So it's a little bit of a grouchy title, isn't it? It's like, no, keep that away from me. I don't want a future that is just run by technocrats and trillionaires. It doesn't sound good to me. I refuse. Also, I like the echo it has of a Herman Melville story called Bartleby the Scrivener, in which there's this, it's kind of an absurd story. This scrivener, this accountant, is hired at a firm, and every time they give him a job, he says, I would prefer not to. He's not rude about it, right? He's got a smile on his face. He's like, I would prefer not. And that's all Bartleby ever says. That's like his only line of dialogue. And he says it over and over and over. And it's a very funny story. and quite absurdist, and I wanted an echo of that. I wanted to echo Melville. I thought that was kind of a lovely idea. There's so much right now to refuse. And it's kind of nice to be able to just do that without getting all bent out of shape about it, just to say, no, I'm going to shrug that off. There's some things that are going wrong. Okay, I'm going to shrug that off. I'm going to go the other direction. I'm going to be contrary. That's a wonderful thing for a writer to be able to do, because, you've got your pages in front of you, and I don't think the book is a polemic exactly. I think the book is ultimately hopeful. I think it's ultimately cheerful, even though dreadful things happen throughout. Terrible things, the worst things I've ever written about happened in this book. And yet I could not feel down while I was working on it. I wrote the first draft in about 100 days at the beginning of the pandemic. We were all locked down. Nobody was calling. I had nothing to do. Robin said, "This is the time to start." So I did. I started the day we went into lockdown. And every day it was just like, I'm going to work on this crazy story. I have no idea if I'll ever, is anybody going to want to read this? I didn't know. But I felt like I was given this free chunk of time without any commitments, without any phone calls. So I wrote as fast as I could. And then I took a long time doing the rewrite, because ultimately I'm a very slow writer. But it was wonderful, and I felt cheerful writing it. I felt quite upbeat writing it in our very quiet neighborhood in Duluth. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. Yes?
I enjoyed that you included Lake Superior in this story. And as I was reading your description of Lake Superior, it seemed to me like it was a beautiful dance, or a gorgeous painting that I was looking at. How you described Lake Superior was just so artistic to me. You also called Lake Superior a her, and I'm wondering, where you got that description and why it was a her.
Wow. Yeah, good question. Thanks for your compliments. I really appreciate that. The lake deserves all the beauty we can throw in her direction. So if I can write some good sentences about her, fantastic. I guess I think of her because that's the pronoun I have always heard assigned to, great natural wonders, especially water, Pacific Ocean. I think of it as something kind of holy. There's something really holy about that lake. Maybe there is about all giant bodies of water, probably so. But Superior is the one that I first encountered. And to this day, to come over that hill, if you're going up on 35 and you come over it, or you're coming in from Central Entrance, to the west, and you reach the Coppertop Church, and it's like, the first time I ever saw the lake, I was going in from the west, and I got to that church on the hillside, the Coppertop, and I looked. I was in my early 20s, and I saw the water, and there were like 3 or 4 different weather systems that were traveling in different directions at the same time. So there was a thunderhead that was moving off to the north, and there was another rain cloud that was moving off, toward the east, and then as I drove down the hill, there was a little shower of hail that just hit. It was like 3 things at one time that were all visible, and I thought, this is where the gods live. I mean, it's like I couldn't believe my good luck, and at the time I thought, how am I going to get here? How am I going to live here? How can I get here someday? It took me many years, but Robin and I did move there 8 years ago. It's been lovely to be near that body of water, which just feels like, if the lake's in a bad mood, Duluth is kind of in a bad mood. And when the sun shines and there's this lovely breeze out of the west, then Duluth is just everybody is happy. I mean, maybe other people haven't experienced it that. Maybe I'm projecting. I do that all the time, I am told. So it could be that, but it just feels like whatever the weather's doing, whatever the lake is doing, that's how people feel. And I really like that. I like that connection. I think people must feel that way if they live on mountains, you know? I've never lived on one, but I can imagine that you absorb the mood of the mountain around you. We're creatures of the earth.
While the book is set in the near future,
Yeah.
you don't give any time frames around that. And then also, we don't know what happened to get us to this point. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, why was that a cognizant thought to set it that way for some reason?
Yeah, it was. It was a conscious thought. The question has to do with we don't know exactly what the time frame is, and also we don't know quite how the world got into this sorry condition that it's in. And I wanted to leave those things quite vague, just to cover my hind end. I would hate to be in a spot where I was predicting something, and here's how it happened, and then I promise you I'm going to be wrong. I'm just not that smart. So. Time frame, I was thinking 25 years out, 30 years out. By the time the book came out, it felt more like 25 minutes out. But I think that it's good to sort of hedge your bets when it comes to here's exactly what happened. But on the whole, I think it's safe to say that, that wealth has gone to the top 1% of the 1%. I think income inequality has reached a point where people just don't own stuff. And I think that there would be a lot of problems with that. I think that there have probably been wars in the intervening years over resources. If you live in flyover country, it is truly flyover country at this point. People barely know you're there. One thing I did not do, and somebody asked me this the other day, is why didn't you make it more of a surveillance state? Because that seems like it would be quite easy to do. And a lot of futuristic books use the surveillance state as a plot device, and the answer is I just couldn't bear it. I couldn't endure. I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to write a book like that because it would have made me feel claustrophobic and deeply sad and depressed. And I wanted to write a book in which some things have gone off the rails, but not in such a way that they cannot be repaired, because I don't see any use in despair. The trouble with despair is that it doesn't give you room. There's no room in it I think if you're in despair too badly, then when the good thing happens, you miss it. I think in a way you have to be open to hopefulness, because otherwise, when the good thing occurs, you might just have your eyes on the ground. You might not see it. So that's a little bit why I wrote it the way I did. I wanted a picture of a world that's in some real trouble. And I think that in some ways we're trending towards some genuine trouble. Trouble we don't want to have happen. I think in that book, Democracy's Been Lost. I think a lot of us see how easily that could happen if we are not wise. So that's why there are certain vague things about the book. But what I hope is not vague is that there is a sense of ongoingness. I just can't get excited about the end of history. A lot of generations think they're the end of history. We're the end. We're the generation that's going to see the end of all things. I don't think we're anywhere close. But I heard that a lot when I was growing up. It's like, look out, man. There's going to be a rapture. It's like, maybe not. I like the idea that maybe there's not. Not now, at least. Thank you for asking that question.
So I really enjoyed some of the references you had in this book to some of your previous characters in old books, like Greenstone from Virgil Wanderer, and I think maybe Molly Thorne might be a grown-up pen name for Swede, possibly. But my question for you is, in a grudge match, who's to the death, who's coming out alive? Is it Jabe Waltzner, Adam Lear, or Warwick?
Oh wow, that's such a great question. Yeah, you've really read the shelf. I would say my money would have to be on for really malevolent strongmen. Walter might be kind of hard to take. He might be hard to beat. I mean, he's just such a physical specimen as well. I quite love Warwick. I do love him as a villain. But let's face it, he's pretty stove up. No, thank you for asking about that. That's fun.
Hi, thank you so much for your really thoughtful responses. My question is kind of following the question about the title of the book.
Yeah.
I was really struck by the choice to have a titular book within the book, and I was wondering if you could tell us about your process of like thinking through what the I Cheerfully Refuse in the book, like what that story was.
Yeah.
How much have you thought through that? Do you have a beginning, middle, of end of that? And if so, could we get a little sneak peek?
Yeah, I Cheerfully Refuse, the book within the book. I've always kind of liked that device as a way of, shorthand for things in history or for a character. A story within a story is kind of fun to work with. In this case, it was especially useful because I wanted a sense of, I wanted to give credibility to this character, Molly Thorne. And somebody drew a parallel with an earlier character, Swedeland, from a different book. And yeah, that parallel is very carefully drawn. I didn't want it to have more weight than it should, but I wanted it to be like a touchstone. I wanted it to be something, in a way, this story, Cheerfully Refuse, is set in very uncertain times. Things are dangerous. There's no safety net for really anybody. They're tough days. What I loved about Molly Thorne's book is that it was her response to the similar days of her youth. When she is a girl, there is a comet. This would have been in 1965. There was a comet that was much written about. I did a lot of reading about this. That's a real thing. I didn't make that up. And people in 1965 got very concerned about this comet, and articles were written, and sermons were preached, and the end times were coming, and this comet meant bad things for the people of this world. And I loved how she had the benefit of being around somebody who was wise enough when she was a girl to say, don't listen to these people. They have no idea what they're talking about. How often do we hear stuff that we don't know? We don't know the truth, but it's a very exciting story. Somebody's always predicting the end of time. Somebody's always saying, well, look out. This terrible thing is going to happen. There are going to be signs and wonders. And I guess that's okay. But I remember being 12 and being told by serious adults that I was going to be raptured by Jesus before I turned 20. Well, that's a dreadful thing to hear when you're 12. You just want to grow up, right? You just want to grow up and have a life like everybody else got to. You want to grow up like the adults did, who are now having their life, and maybe they're actually a little bored with it, so they think this sounds kind of exciting. And you're a 12-year-old kid going, really? Oh, no. That was terrible news. I've never been so happy when an adult was wrong. So I guess that what I wanted was, from that whole thing, I Cheerfully Refuse, from the book within a book, was just a little perspective. That times are hard sometimes, and everything is uncertain, and we don't know. And I loved that Molly Thorne had a little bit of a handle on that. She had a little bit of a handle on, hey, let's not panic. Let's not panic here. Let's enjoy our lives. Let's be good to each other. Let's be kind. Let the comet worry about itself. Let's be good to each other. That was what Molly Thorne's book was in there for, was just a through line from the early 60s until whenever that book takes place.
I so appreciate your time tonight, but before you go, I wonder if you can tell us whether another book is brewing in your head.
Oh, yeah, sure it is, yeah. It is. I'm not going to tell you much about it, though, because I'm superstitious. And if I talk about it, then it will run away. The muse is doesn't like to be, like, spoken of. But yeah, I am. One more? Okay.
Hi.
Hey.
I liked what you said in your intro about art being an answer to uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I was curious about why a musician for Rainey, but I wonder if that kind of answers it too. Is that what Rainey's answer to the uncertain world he was living in was, to be a musician? And is that kind of, I thought it was interesting how Lark had this parallel of one of the oldest forms of storytelling, and so does Rainey, and then they come together over books. But
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting parallel. So why music?
Well, because music is one of those things that I played bass in our church band for many years, and it was just one of the loveliest things I got to do, and it made me feel like. I don't know, I think what music does, whether you're playing it or whether you're listening to it, is it takes you out of the moment, it takes you out of the stressful moment that you're in, and lets you be someplace else. I think it is maybe more magical than any other art form in its ability to just lift you out of whatever is holding you down, whatever is weighing down your limbs. Man, if you listen to some of the music that you love, it takes you out of that. It takes you out of the doldrums. It lets the wind blow through your life in a way that is restorative, more than maybe any other art form, I think. So I wanted him to be a musician because he's been through a lot in his life. And I feel like if you're a musician, then you have at your disposal the means to lift yourself up and other people around you. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Again, thanks for coming. Thanks for our author. Super excited about next year, too. So we look forward to next year. And until then, good night, good reading, and safe travels home.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a great.